So that's Dolly Madison, and you probably wonder, hey Bill, why the stamp of Dolly Madison? What's so important there? Well, you know, on August 22nd of 1812, President James Madison, he left the White House, and he went to meet with his generals in preparation for the last stand against the invading British forces. But before leaving, he asked Dolly Madison to save whatever she could of American history. And at great personal risk to herself, and I do mean great personal risk, she was able to save the full-length portrait of George Washington and escape just before the White House was burned to the ground. And it wasn't until 1817 that President Monroe was able to move back into the newly constructed White House. But if it wasn't for her, we would have lost quite a bit of American history, things that we hold dear, because she stayed behind to save it. And when I say at great personal risk, I'm not kidding. God knows what they would have done to her if they would have captured her. If you go further down in the album, I have the stamp of Fort McHenry. And the reason I like that stamp is, well, in 1812, it was at the Battle of Fort McHenry that the national, our national anthem was developed by Francis Scott Key. He was out on a ship, and all night long they continuously shelled the flagpole at Fort McHenry, trying to get it to, of course, get knocked over and take over the fort. And at the end of the night, what happened was the Patriots had used the bodies of the dead to hold up the flagpole. In the morning, when Francis Scott Key got out on the prison ship and looked out across the harbor and up to Fort Henry, in the dawn's early light, he could see that the flag was still there. That's how close we came to losing this country in 1812. But, the War of 1812 really isn't discussed anymore. They don't teach it in schools, and people have no idea. But what started that war was the British used to stop American ships at sea. They would take the sailors and they would impress them. They'd put them into the British Navy and basically make them slaves. And so we had to put an end to that, had to straighten them out. This page of my album is dedicated entirely to the Rough Riders. And as you know, the Spanish sunk the Maine in Havana Harbor. That precipitated the Spanish-American War. Some interesting things about this war is, if you notice here, there's Blackjack Pershing. He was he ended up being a World War I general. Back then he was in the Spanish-American War, and he led the Buffalo Soldiers up San Juan Hill. I have Teddy Roosevelt right here, and of course Teddy Roosevelt also charged up San Juan Hill. And this is pretty cool. This is a monument to Bucky O'Neill. He was a captain of the Rough Riders, and he lost his life at San Juan Hill. And so I have all those stamps. I have the Remember the Maine stamp and all the stamps from the Spanish-American War. This is an interesting stamp. This is the stamp to honor Bill Malden. And Bill Malden was a cartoonist with the 45th Infantry Division. And he did a wonderful cartoon throughout the war. It was called Willie and Joe, and it was a comic for the troops, you know. And Patton hated him. He hated his comics because Willie and Joe looked disheveled. They looked like field soldiers, you know. But pretty funny cartoons, and it kept the morale of the troops up all throughout the war. And so Malden used to get into it with Patton all the time about being clean-shaven, and this little back and forth of the two of them. But Malden helped win the Second World War by keeping morale up. That's my stamp of Francis Scott Key. As you know, he was the author of the national anthem, the Star-Spangled Banner. And like I said, Francis Scott Key, he witnessed the 25 hours of bombardment of Fort McHenry. They fired over 1,500 shells, and in the morning, when he saw the American flag still flying, he wrote the verses down on the back of an envelope. In 1931, it became our national anthem. So this is one of my favorite stamps. This is a stamp of the Alamo. And whenever I look at this stamp, I think of the old Travis letter from the Alamo. I don't think there's anyone that hasn't committed that to heart. I think it starts out, Commandancy of the Alamo, Behar, February 24th, 1836. To the people of Texas and all Americans in the world, fellow citizens and compatriots, I am besieged by 1,000 or more of the Mexicans under Santa Anna, have sustained a continual bombardment and cannonade for 24 hours and have not lost a man. The enemy has demanded a surrender at discretion. Otherwise, the garrison are to be put to the sword. If the fort is taken, I have answered the demand with a cannon shot, and our flag still waves proudly from the walls. I shall never surrender or retreat. And then I call upon you, in the name of liberty and patriotism and everything dear to the American character, to come to our aid with all dispatch. The enemy is receiving reinforcements daily and will no doubt increase to 3,000 or 4,000 in 4 or 5 days. If this call is neglected, I am determined to sustain myself as long as possible and die like a soldier who never forgets what is due his men, his own honor, and that of his country. Victory or death. Signed, William Barrett Travis. Year of our Lord, 1836. Well, you all know what happened at the Alamo and what they had to do there. This is the World War I section of my album, and in it I have Alvin C. York. As you know, Alvin C. York was a mountain man, learned how to shoot in the Appalachian Mountains, and ended up doing quite a bit of saving lives there in the First World War, and he did it by sniping. He would snipe the Germans so successfully that they would surrender in large groups. And true story, he was a Medal of Honor recipient, Alvin C. York. And of course I have Pershing there. And this stamp here on the bottom, this is a World War I commemorative stamp. That just came out last year, so, you know, every once in a while the post office will actually kick out a pretty decent stamp. Most of you have probably never seen this. This is a war ration stamp book. During the war, you know, things were rationed in the Second World War, and you had to have a ration book to get certain things. You can see on the bottom there I have spares for coffee and you know, various different things, pantyhose and gasoline and all of the things that were rationed during the war. But if you didn't have one of these ration books and your ration stamps, you often couldn't get those items. So, a little piece of American history there. There was rationing during the war. So this is an interesting stamp. This is a commemorative stamp commemorating the Medal of Honor, and it's inlaid in 24 karat gold. So yeah, it's just a cool little stamp. I don't think it's worth anything, but it is to me. It's a great piece of American history, you know. In the since the founding of the nation, only 2,643 people have been recipients of the Medal of Honor. It's America's highest military decoration for valor, and it's the subject of this commemorative stamp. So this is from the first day of issue, which is June 7th, 1983. Here's my American Independence page, and these are all my stamps from the Revolutionary War. I have all the military services up top there. I have the commemorative from the bicentennial. If you look right here, I have John Paul Jones, and I can remember watching the John Paul Jones movie, and the ship was just completely in tatters, man. Wood splinters everywhere, dead on the deck. I mean, it looked hopeless. And John Paul Jones, he jumped out there, and they asked him, "Do you surrender, sir?" And his response was, "Sir, I have not yet begun to fight." And as you know, he ended up winning, and we ended up having America. So, yeah. Another interesting part of the album. This album has 4 stamps on it, and it's a commemorative stamp. It honors the immortal chaplains. They were on the Dorchester when it was sunk by a German U-boat in 1943, and as it went down, they sacrificed their lives because they gave up their life preservers to others, and all 4 of them perished. Yeah. I hope you can see this one. This is one of the few stamps. Vietnam was a pretty controversial war, and at home they really didn't support it. But this stamp here is one of the coolest commemoratives from the Vietnam War, because it shows troops disembarking a helicopter there in Vietnam. And Vietnam was really the first helicopter war. I mean, they had helicopters in Korea, but Vietnam was the first time that troops were moved around by helicopter air assault, air cavalry, that type of thing. So it's an important stamp to have. The rest on this page are all commemoratives honoring MacArthur and Churchill and Nimitz, and yeah. And then, of course, the Korean War itself right there. You can see the Korean War Memorial.
Stay safe, stay warm, stay free.